Hey, Abby, welcome back to the podcast.
Thanks for having me on, Monica.
Yes, it is a privilege to get to grab a little time in your very busy life. Now, you've been on with us before. I guess it was when this was the Boy Mom podcast, but you're a mom of boys and girls, and you've
hmm
got a whole lot going on. So, for anyone that doesn't know you, could you just give a quick introduction?
Yeah, sure. I'm Abbie Halberstadt. I am first and foremost a sinner saved by grace by Jesus. And if you knew nothing else about me, that's what I would want you to know, that He is good and that His grace is enough. And I also get to be married by the grace of God to a really amazing man named Sean. And together we have 10 children. And people always ask, like, are they all yours from the same dad? Any multiples? Which we do. We have two sets of twins. And so, yeah, 10 kids in 14 years. Our oldest is 17, will be 18 in May, and our youngest, oh, we have a lot going on always.
You do. And because I don't think it ever gets old, tell us about the twins. You've got twins on
Right. Yes.
bookends, right?
So we have a set of identical boy twins. Those are our 3-year-olds, and identical girl twins. Those are our 11-year-olds. And that in and of itself is very unusual because people always ask, do twins run in your family? Like, is it hereditary? And fraternal twins, yes. Where you actually have two fertilized eggs.
Mm-hmm.
But where an egg splits is not, that's just a gift from the Lord. It's not supposed to be hereditary. It's not supposed to happen more likely in one person than another. They've tried to study it and find any kind of like factors that would make someone more likely. I'm sure they exist, but they haven't found consistencies yet. So the fact that I have two sets of identical twins, which are spontaneous and don't have to do with genetics or aren't supposed to, or passed down is kind of crazy. And we actually were pregnant with another set of identical twins. We lost our number six, our number seven. So we have number six, 8 weeks. And so that's even crazier because
Mm.
we're pretty sure he was identical as well. The
Wow.
easiest way to tell with what's called mono-di twins is that the mono refers to the placenta, the di refers to two separate amniotic sacs. So if they share one placenta, it's because your body was preparing to have one baby and then that split and now you have two. So
Got
that's
it.
unusual. And then the crazy thing is that they were born on the same calendar day, 8 years apart. So September 24th, we knock out four birthdays all at once.
Seriously, like that just never ceases to blow my mind.
Yeah,
That's got to
mine
be
either.
wild. Yeah, you couldn't plan that. You couldn't, which
Yeah,
just shows the goodness and grace of God. I love
that's
it.
pretty
So
cool.
fun. It is so great. And I'm just curious, talking twins, was it any easier? Did you feel like you kind of came into it the second time with a little more like, okay, I got this, or was it a whole new ballgame?
Well, Evie and Nola were actually pretty easy babies. Having two at one time is not easy. It's just not. Having
It's no
one
way.
at a time,
No.
they're brand new. It's not easy.
Right.
That's not the goal. We're not looking for this to be easy.
That's
That's
right.
not why we had kids.
Which is what our conversation's all about today.
Right. Two is definitely harder, but Evie and Nola were very chill babies. They were the
Hmm.
opposite of chill toddlers. And I
Hmm.
talk about this some in the book that we're going to discuss.
Yep.
But as babies, they were pretty easygoing. Like they were sleeping a decent amount of time at night together by 11 weeks. We nursed pretty well. Like it was a big adjustment, but because I already had three other kids. So I had
Hmm.
five kids, six and under. And two of them were the same age, and one was a toddler, and just boom, boom, boom. And so it was fine. I remember feeling overwhelmed at times, but I remember being grateful that my expectations of that very newborn stage being just utterly overwhelming weren't really met. Well, Titus and Tobias were not easy babies. they
Mm.
were they were not chill. They did not sleep. And so honestly, I don't know that they threw us for a loop in the sense that it was anything new. It was just a lot of it. Like it was
Yeah.
both hands on deck. Like my husband and I were holding passies in their mouths at the same time at night, trying to
Yeah.
like keep them in there without falling asleep ourselves, but of
Oh,
course failing miserably, and then they're awake again. Just so there wasn't much sleep that happened for about 11 months in that case, but we made it.
oh man. And when you're already a little older and tireder and have all
Yeah,
these other kids,
yeah,
like come
yeah,
on.
yep.
Well, you earned the right to write these books that you write. So now tell us a little about that. I don't know if I know the story of when you started writing. Like what was your pathway from being a mom to what you're now doing?
Yeah, so I have wanted the one consistent quote unquote dream. And I always say, I'm not a dreamer, I'm a pragmatist. I'm not like a pie in the sky. I don't have 5 year plans. It's like we're getting dinner on the table tonight and we know where we need to be for the rest of the week and I'm good,
Right.
kind of
Yeah.
thing. And
Love
it's
it.
less about not being forward thinking and more about just being extremely practical. I don't really have any control about what's happening in 6 months. So
Right.
I'm going to do the thing always. I'm going to be the girl that does the thing that needs to be done. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And so so like 7, I remember I want to write books.
Mm-hmm.
And the
Mm-hmm.
Lord never took that desire away. And I pursued a path of writing multiple times when I was in my 20s. I wrote a novel in
Oh.
completion, shopped it around, did some things like that. And the Lord just very clearly closed doors in my face. It wasn't the right time. And then I started a blog almost 13 years ago when my third, who is a little girl, we have 3 girls right in the middle of 7 boys. And when she was maybe about 7 or 8 months old, I started a blog for the express purpose of growing an audience to write a book one day. Well,
Hmm.
when you're like 8 years deep into that and you've had another, I think at that point, 5 kids, you kind of go, it's probably not happening, right, Lord? Like
Mm.
this is what you want me to do. You want me to raise these babies and these older kids and these kids that are starting to get deep voices and really tall and write on the internet to whomever you choose to bring across my path, and that's what you have for me. And
Mm-hmm.
I had really gotten really content with that. I wasn't
Mm-hmm.
pursuing in a traditional way or querying people or looking for agents. My life was just really full. And I
Mm-hmm.
say in the book that I remember telling my mom, like at some point in there, kind of before I had surrendered the dream to some extent, that I was like, Lord, or Mom, how would I ever find time to do this? Like, there's just so much. And she, in an attempt to kind of reassure me, was like, if you've got a message that needs to be said, then somebody will say it. Like, if the Lord needs the message out there, it
Mm.
doesn't have to be you. And of
Good
course,
word.
to a dream in your heart, that's like stake in the
Yeah.
heart. You're like, oh,
Yeah, it is.
Mom,
But
you're supposed to
yeah.
be the Disney, because my mom is the kindest human in the world. I'm not like complaining about
Yeah.
her. She was trying to release me from that burden
Mm-hmm.
of feeling
Mm-hmm.
like I needed to be the one to say these things. And she's like, the Lord can accomplish it. I think kind of, that response of like where Elijah's like, I'm the only one. I didn't think I was the only one. I wasn't saying that.
Right.
But it's like,
Sure.
it's got to be me, or I feel like I want to do this. And I wouldn't say that my message had just completely cohered at that point yet. Like, I don't know that I had gotten it down to this burning passion in my heart, to
Mm-hmm.
share this particular message. I just knew that I wanted to write and I was
Yep.
writing. So she's like, take what you got, be faithful in what
Yep.
you have, and then if it needs to happen, it'll happen, or the Lord will give that message to somebody else. And so I remember just thinking like, oh, okay, well, I guess that's what it is. Well, then in November of 2019, I got an email. I was walking through my bedroom on my way to do laundry. I just put my 8-month-old baby down for a nap. That was number 8.
I love
And
that you
was
know
like,
the scene. You have it
huh?
in your head. I
Yes.
love
Oh,
that
I
you know the
know. I
scene.
know. And my phone dinged, and I wasn't even going to check it because I was like, get as much done as possible while the baby's asleep. I had like a wallpaper project and I needed to flip the laundry, and I was just going to kind of go. And my other kids, I think, were at my mom's because I think the baby was the only one home with me. And I saw just like out of the corner of my eye the notification, and it said something about a publishing house. But you know how it is. You get lots of emails from publishing houses that want you to promote their book. They want to send you a copy. And
Mm-hmm.
that's what it is. But I kid you not, Monica, I had a micro fantasy, 0.2 seconds of what if that's not what it is.
Oh, okay.
And that never turns out to be what's actually happening. It's always
Mm-hmm.
that it's a
Oh, yeah.
fantasy and not reality. But something in the wording caught my eye, and I opened it, and it was indeed a publisher from Harvest House Publishers asking me if I'd ever thought of writing a book. She'd been following me for years. She had kids at about the same time that I'd been having kids, kind of the
Mm.
same spacing. She herself had been really encouraged by what I was sharing about motherhood, related to me deeply on a personal level, and just wanted to know if I would consider reaching out to them and working with them. And I mean, I just about threw the phone out the window in my excitement and immediately texted my husband, who was on a work trip. And he doesn't usually text back right away because he's on a work trip and he's in the middle of
Mm-hmm.
work. But I got an answer in like 2 seconds. It was like, oh my
Mm.
goodness, that's amazing, because he's so encouraging
Mm.
and supportive, and has always said that he thinks that someday that this will happen,
Mm.
even when I think I had lost faith. And
Mm-hmm.
so he said, "That's amazing. What are you going to do?" And I'm like, "I'm going to try and play it cool." So
Ah.
I waited probably like maybe an hour, and then was like, "I have thought about it a time or two. Yes,
Yes.
it's entered my mind. What did you have in mind?"
I
Kind of
love
thing.
it.
And so originally I was going to write the book that you are holding now in your hands called Hard Is Not the Same Thing as Bad, but they wanted to call it Emma's for Mama because that's my brand.
Mm-hmm.
And I just really felt like that was not the right title for the content of that book. I didn't want
Mm-hmm.
people to feel like they'd been bait and switched. And
Mm-hmm.
so, but then when they said we need a book called Emma's for Mama, I was like, well, I can write that book. I have been doing these Q&As.
Yep.
I know kind of what these women need. I know
Mm-hmm.
what they're asking for. I know what they're begging for answers for every week, and themes are emerging. I could 100% have enough content
Yes.
for this book to kind of be the gateway
There we go
into.
to the real book I want to write.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So, and Image for Mama ended up being very much so a real book that I wanted and needed to write. It's just really clear that the Lord and His sovereignty made the order what it was. I've had so many people say, "I'm so glad I read Image for Mama first and got
Mm-hmm.
my feet wet," because
Yeah.
I think I would have not been ready for Hard Is Not the Same Thing as Bad had that
Sure.
not been kind of the
Yeah.
order of things. So, yeah, the Lord knew
Mm-hmm.
what He was doing, shockingly enough, as He always
Yeah.
does.
Wow. So awesome. I
Yeah.
love that story. That's really encouraging. And I know you probably, like I do, hear from people who say, I want to write a book. I think I have a book in me.
Yeah.
And I love that your story, like mine, didn't start off writing a book. We just did the next thing.
Yeah.
And with very similar to you, I really had no idea where it would lead. I just thought I'm going to be faithful. And
Yeah.
I've told the story, I don't know if I've ever told it on the podcast, but at one point when I was a blogger doing just this, didn't have a large audience or anything, there was a moment where my husband, over a date night sushi dinner, kind of challenged me and was like, "So, is this a hobby or a job? Like, it's starting to take a lot of time." And my passion kind of rose up in me, and I was like, you know, I feel like I'm doing what I was created to do. And yes, I want to continue to homeschool. I want to be the best wife and mom I can be. But whether I have 10 people or 10 million people reading, I feel like I need to keep writing. And it was in that moment that he looked across the table at me and said, "Okay, then I'm on board. How can I support you?"
I love that.
And it was the very next blog post I wrote was my first viral blog post.
Oh,
So
wow.
I can't help but feel like God was doing something in just bringing us together and getting my
Yeah.
husband on board. And I
Yeah.
think before that, I wasn't in any way not respecting him. He didn't ever tell me not to write, but I didn't feel like he was part of it. It felt kind of like my little sneaky side passion.
Yeah.
So once he stepped up and said, "Let me support you," I feel like everything changed. So
Oh, it
there were,
changes everything. Absolutely. I dedicated my first book to Sean. I call him Albie. And I said, for you because you always thought I could. Like he
yeah,
never, it sounds so cheesy. It sounds so cheesy, but
yeah,
he never doubted that the,
I love that.
that the Lord could accomplish it. And
Yeah,
even in the midst of the unlikely circumstances of having to juggle it plus motherhood plus homeschooling plus all the
yeah,
things
yeah.
that when people hear this a lot of times they don't respond super well. They're like, well, I mean, clearly you gave something up or whatever. But even with for mama, interestingly enough, so I signed this contract in November of 2019. I didn't know what was going to happen in 2020. I didn't know I was going to be pregnant with twin baby boys. I did not know that the world was going to shut down. And do you know when I wrote this book? I wrote this book while the world was shut down.
Yep.
And the Lord gave me time to gestate two babies and also gestate this book baby in a
Yeah.
way that I was completely unaware would happen. But
Incredible.
I like my schedule went down to like nothing. I couldn't teach fitness
Yeah.
classes. I couldn't, all these things that were our church shut down for a little while, not for very long. But there were just way fewer social requirements on my
Yep.
time during a
Yeah.
specific period when I needed a really concentrated amount of time
Yep.
to spend on, writing these chapters. And I still feel like my husband has always said, I've always said this to him about, excuse me, I'm going to get a drink. I've always said to him, we've built a couple of houses together. I say casually as if that's not an amazing accomplishment on his part,
Right.
but he is incredible. So when I say we, I do a lot, but of course he's the builder. And he's really fast. Like he and his dad get in there and they just go. And two guys get a ton done because they're invested. It's our house. They want it done well, that kind of thing. And he says, I feel like you do the same with writing. Like you crank out a ton in a short period of time. And I feel like part of that is just that foundation that the Lord helped me to lay for all of those years when it wasn't on a deadline. You're
Yes.
practicing your craft, you're honing your voice, you're getting so much better at condensing thoughts down
Yep.
into coherent sentences. Like those almost 10 years that I spent blogging before a book was ever out into the public were not wasted at all.
Amen.
And not just because they helped me to practice for what the Lord was preparing me for, but because I have like a family journal of all these things I might not have documented
Yeah.
otherwise,
Yeah.
So yeah, just kind of looking back and being like, wow, Lord, you just really had it every step of the way. Again, not surprised, but it's still cool to see.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. And I want to transition and talk about this book. But all of this really leads so well into it, and I guess maybe there is somebody listening who is a writer or dreaming of being a writer. So I hope that this story does encourage you to start writing, whether it's on a blog or in a journal, just be writing. And if the husband factor, that story came up too. Maybe your husband's not on board. Well, pray and keep being faithful to do the first things first, is what I say. I mean, I was 40 years old with 4 kids before I wrote my first blog post, and that was God's timing. And so I say, do the most important things. And so hopefully someone
Amen.
out there is encouraged by both of our stories. But it was during those years that you and I did a lot of hard things. Not necessarily hard in the eyes of the world or big. We weren't. Well, you were building houses. I wasn't building houses, but I was lonely and I was faithful, and I wasn't always doing a great job. But we were doing the hard things in the home. People listening are doing the same, as well as probably a whole lot of other hard things. So you mentioned that this was your first book dream idea. Where did this concept, I know a bit from reading your book and following you that you might not have been raised with all these concepts, drilled in daily, but how did you come to understand the value of hard?
I think that I really did have those concepts drilled into me. I would say my parents, of course, I talk about this in the book, they're not perfect, but their intentions were good. And even though the practice or the execution wasn't always perfect, especially in the case of my dad, who struggles with some mental health issues, I saw tenacity and I saw willingness to sacrifice for the sake of the for the sake of the outcome being better than what they were given. I saw an encouragement not to be self-focused. I mean, my mom, I already told you, is the type that is going to be like, you just keep doing the right thing and it doesn't have to be you, and if it is you, great, but like you just give God the glory. And I can't tell you how many times as a kid something disappointing would happen, and my mom was very affectionate. She had nicknames for us. She was very loving. She would always give us hugs, but she was also no nonsense, and she would be like, dig deep into Jesus. Like, I'm not going to go make sure you get that part in the play that you wanted.
Yep.
I'm going to
No
say,
coddling.
I get that it's hard, but the Lord has a purpose. The Lord's still sovereign. The Lord has a reason for this. And you need to turn around and dig deep into Jesus. She wasn't just, and she would, take me and get me some Taco Bell or something terrible like that. She was such a health freak, but she knew I loved those crunchy tacos. She would take me and run me through the drive-through and get me some Taco Bell and take me to Goodwill. It's not like because we like to thrift shop. That may have sounded weird to people that don't like to thrift shop, but that was a pick me up.
Yeah.
And so it wasn't just these empty words. She backed them up.
Yes.
But at the same time, the idea was never that if you experience a hard thing, if you experience a setback, if you are overlooked, if you are mistreated, that means that the Lord doesn't love you, that he's not good, that
Yes.
this circumstance was outside his hands, and that you are the worse off for it. In fact, quite the opposite. I think I had really had it drilled into me that these were opportunities for growth and that they shouldn't be despised.
That's huge. And yet, just like me, you then became a mom and had to kind of learn in real life,
Oh, yeah.
real time, what this looks like in the home. You open the book with a story about kind of hitting your wits' end. Can you share a little bit about that and how that even led to what you have to share now?
Yeah, so I again had some kids going on there. At that point, that would have been 6 kids when the book opens. And which is obviously an insane number to most people. Like, why would you do that to yourself? I mean, I've literally been asked that. And yet we've gone on to, have 4 more.
Right.
So we really must be crazy. It is funny that as you reach a certain threshold and you get a little bit older, people stop having quite as much audacity to question you. Like they're kind of like,
Good.
you know what? She's too far gone. Like this is who she is. She's just a nut job. We're just going to
I
leave it
love it.
be, kind of
I
thing.
love it.
And when you get older kids, people feel a lot more audacity to question you when your kids are boom, boom, boom and little bitty. Kind of like
Exactly.
they kind of think like they can't understand me. They won't get it. Now, kids do pick up on things, I truly believe. And I really encourage all adults everywhere to be careful of what they say around young
Yeah,
years, because
for sure.
speaking words of life really can be such an effective way to disciple young children that you see in the grocery store, even to
Yeah.
praise their mom for good job, good job being
Yes.
here and getting that healthy food. And man, you're doing a really good job of helping him with his tantrum, or, whatever it is that we can do to be encouragers.
Good word.
But I was dealing with 6 kids, 2 3-year-olds, late twos, early threes, and they just lost their proverbial minds. I mean, they just didn't respond to anything that I had worked with my other 3. And I already had some challenging kids. Like people are like, okay, so you had 10 kids because one, you're incredibly patient, which is not true. I'm not naturally patient. The Lord has grown me in that area, but I'm not naturally patient. And 2, you must have just a bunch of docile, compliant kids. And I
Oh,
just
right.
snort, I'm like,
Pure
no,
angels.
no, that's not how that works. My first was hard in certain seasons. My second was hard in certain seasons. My third was very rarely hard. And I think the Lord just kind of throws some of those in there just for an extra little dose of sugar, because we're like, man, I just need a break, Lord.
Yes.
Stella, my first girl, is very chill and always has been. Now, there are seasons still in her life where we've had to work through things, and there will be seasons in the future where
Yes.
we do. There's no such thing, because we are in this, broken world and we are sinful humans. That means no trouble ever. But she was really chill, and those babies were pretty chill, and then they went crazy in their toddler years. And no amount of consistency, no amount of follow through, no amount of reasoning, no amount of like like toddler proofing, it just wasn't sinking in. And I already knew not to expect, quote unquote, my methods to work in a week. I get messages
Right.
all the time from people that are really frustrated that something isn't going their way with their kids. And you're like, well, consistency is key. I've been very consistent. Okay, well, how long? 2.5 weeks. I'm like, I am so sorry to deliver the bad news that it's probably going to take another 20 years. Like maybe not to see some fruit, obviously, but that the consistency is a long haul commitment. And
Yes.
I knew that mentally, and I felt like I was in it, but it still was just not seeming to make a dent. And I talk about the fact that our car rides were just miserable. They screamed from the moment that I buckled them into the car until the moment that we arrived, and often long afterwards. I distinctly remember. So I am a fitness instructor. I've taught classes for 13 years, and I actually 14, 15, since my second born was in utero, 16 and a half years. I don't even know how long.
What a
So
time to start.
I've done this for a long time.
Yeah.
And I taught at a gym for 12 years. That's where that number came from. I taught at a gym for 12 years that had 3 flights of stairs to get into the building. Like, you were already huffing and puffing before you ever started the work, especially when you were bringing 6 small children with you. So I have distinct memories of carrying 2 toddlers, 3-year-olds, one on each hip, and a baby carrier on one arm
Oh
up
boy.
3 flights of stairs. I have no idea what my heart rate was when I got to the top, but it was the only way we were making it into the building in time for me to teach this class, while
Yes.
both of the
Been there.
toddlers are losing their ever loving minds the whole way.
Yes.
And a lot of people will be like, oh, why didn't you just quit and stay home for a time? And you know what? That might have been wise, but that was not my personality. I was gonna tough it through. But
Yeah.
in the process, I just remember sometimes literally banging my head against the glass window of my van, just kind of conk, conk, like just something to just kind of take my mind off of how much I was being screamed at.
Yeah.
And feeling like that season probably was never going to change, and that maybe I had been deluded in thinking that consistency and follow through and instruction and love and discipline were actually going to do anything with these two little humans who were
Yes.
insane. And during that time, as I'm walking through it, I am on the internet and I'm having people message me and they are seeing me. I mean, I didn't share great details, but I'm like, these little girls are throwing me for a loop. This is intense. The Lord is teaching me a lot through this. They're like, so what do you do with this? And someone's like, it's just hard. I just don't like it. Whatever it was that they were paralleling with my own experience. And I was walking with my best friend. That was kind of our sanity. I would strap a baby on my chest and we would walk the trails right beside our gym because as long as we were like within a mile and had left our phone
Oh,
numbers, they were fine
nice.
with our kids being in childcare, which was amazing.
A
So we would
gift.
walk these trails in the fresh air and talk this thing through. And I remember just looking at her one time in a moment of like kind of exasperation of going through something very hard that was testing my limits of patience and endurance and resourcefulness and saying, all these people want me to tell them how to go around the hard. But the thing is, hard is not the same thing as bad. Like, I don't enjoy this season that I'm in for the particular reasons X, Y, and Z. But it's not a bad thing that I'm in it. Like, the Lord
Yeah.
didn't do this by accident, and I am learning so much. And so she goes, so I said, I don't know what to tell these people. She goes, tell them that. And I was like, ah.
Whoa.
So I started using that as a hashtag on social media, and I probably used it for 7 or 8 years before I was ever published. And it
Wow.
just caught on. Like people,
Yeah.
it resonated. It was like this little, like tiny, like switch
Yes.
in your brain that was like, oh, I have been told, I have been conditioned, I have come to adopt the mindset that if it's difficult, it must be something not worth doing.
Totally. Absolutely.
I see this so much in all aspects of culture, but I really see it in motherhood because there's just
Ooh.
this daily confrontation of our sin and our selfishness and our self focus and our desire for ease, which a desire for
Yes.
ease in and of itself, I don't think is evil or anything like that. I think it absolutely makes sense. We see Jesus himself in the garden begging to have this horrible thing, like, please
Yeah.
don't, not this, kind of thing. And
Yeah.
yet his faithfulness, of course, and that's what I talk about in the intro to the book,
Right.
his faithfulness to follow through on the hardest thing anyone has ever done is the
Right.
best example of hard is not the same thing as bad that we have
Yes.
in
Yes.
history. And how can I then therefore despise my own version?
So good. And I think that's just that perspective shift. Like you said, there's nothing wrong with desiring rest or ease, but
Absolutely.
recognizing in the moment. And one thing I love in your book is that at the end of each chapter, you have kind of the world's view of hard and the Christian response to hard. Tell us a little bit about that, like how you categorize that, because I think that if we can learn to see things and have it kind of click, like you said, when you said those words, like, oh, people can grab onto that
Yeah.
and face whatever's in front of them today, recognizing, yeah, this is hard. Maybe I can find a better way to do it, an easier way to do it. But if it's just hard, how can we look at that? Can you give us a
So,
few
my goal is
topics?
always to bring or to shine the light of scripture on whatever it is that we are mentally struggling with, whatever it is we're grappling with, whether it's cultural or personal or interpersonal, relational, and to say, what does the Bible have to say about this? Now, people get very literal and they're like, but the Bible doesn't say anything about twin toddlers, Abby. So, what are you really going to get out of this? And I think that when we renew our mind with scripture, the Lord is faithful to show us those passages that are really enlightening. Like, I always love using Galatians 6:9, which doesn't have anything specific to do with motherhood,
Yeah,
but don't grow weary at doing good, for in the proper time you will reap a harvest if you do not give up. It's like basically the most encouraging verse ever to
it
every
is.
mother that,
Yeah.
like reads it. You're like, oh, this is work. Like, this is worth it. All this investing is going to have fruit. And if not invisible fruit that I can see in my children in my own life, like it's going to change me and grow me because that in and of itself is ultimately why we're called to do what we're called to do. Invest in others, yes, but also be accountable to the Lord ourselves. And so I put that part at the end of the chapters as a way of easily condensing down these concepts so that you can parallel a worldly mindset, which I think we're all capable of falling into, absolutely
Absolutely.
myself included, something that we have to battle daily. And I don't think that there's any shame in that. I think scripture tells us to put on the full armor of God because it is fully aware that
Yep.
we are going to struggle. We hear
Yes.
Paul talking about, the things that I want to do aren't the things that I do. The things that I don't do are the things I end up doing. Who can save me from my wretched state? And the answer is
Yes.
Jesus. And
Yes.
so we have so many scriptures that line up with this concept that Jesus, even though he was facing death, did not despise it, but was obedient even to death on a cross. Like he
Exactly.
humbled himself. He did
Mm-hmm.
all these things that the world would tell us, if you're in a position of supreme authority, why would you ever put yourself through that?
Right.
How foolish
Yes.
would you be to take that on?
Yes.
Why is the advice to us not to manifest our best selves and to pursue the most prosperous future, but instead to take up our cross daily and follow Jesus? How countercultural is that? And yet, how much are we able to see the joy there is when we truly surrender to the Lord those desires and wishes and dreams, like wanting to write a book, and then He brings it to fruition when He chooses in His own time.
Amen.
And like I said, if He chooses, because there are absolutely things that I have desired that never came to pass. And honestly, some of them I don't know why. And some of them I'm like, praise the Lord, that didn't happen. Like, wow,
Yes.
I dodged a bullet. I thought that that was going to be great. And it was really going to be disaster.
Exactly.
So I put those things at the end. It's called the narrative. And I did it in MS for Mama as well, because busy moms reading lots of words. It's not lots of words, but reading words. It
Yes.
needs to be supported with scripture, and then it needs to be reinforced really quickly. So bullet points to help you go, oh
Mm-hmm.
man, that's absolutely how my brain has been working. Or,
Yes.
you know what? I see that all over social media, and I never made the connection that that's what that was. But look what the scripture has to say about it. Cool. That helps so much. So that's why I did that.
Wow. And I also think it's helpful because it helps us recognize. So often when we've seen something enough times, it becomes normalized.
Yeah.
So by seeing those bullet points, we can go, oh, when we're scrolling and we're seeing something that seems either entertaining, funny, relatable, but it's actually feeding something in us that's really not healthy, not going to be for our good or our family's good, then we can recognize it and be like, oh, wait, that's not truth. So I
Right. Yeah.
appreciate, yeah,
Yeah.
I
That's what we
appreciate.
want to do is we want to preach what's right and true. That's exactly right.
Yes. Okay. Another thing I'd love for you to touch on before we wrap up, and we'll just send people to get the book for themselves. But I love how you talk about the refining, restoring, then back to refining process. I think that's something we could apply whether we've read the book or not today. So can you just give us a little insight into what that is?
Well, sure. I mean, the only hard thing in my life wasn't 3-year-old toddlers. Like, and it wasn't the hardest thing in my life leading up to that point, and it hasn't been the hardest thing in my life since. The Lord is in this process of gently and sometimes not so gently chipping away at these things that are keeping us from being more like Him. And we are called to follow Jesus. And if we love Him, we will obey His commandments.
Yeah.
But sometimes maybe we're not mature enough yet to recognize some things that the Lord's calling us to do, which is why we have verses in the Bible, for example, that say, for the person that knows what they should do and they don't do it, for that person it's sin. And so the Lord, I think, is gracious to give us seasons of kind of a pressure cooker feeling and then take us, it says he will restore us. And then, then we go through the hard seasons again. So it's a lifelong process of sanctification. Now, it may look to us like this is not happening to other people. We may look at someone else's life and think they have had nothing but smooth sailing. And there, I do believe, are people that experience less physical and mental suffering in their lives than others. I think some people, like my parents, like I talk about in the book, one of the things that the Lord has designated for them is to be chain breakers, and they don't get the benefit of those chains being broken themselves as much as their children do. And one of our
Wow.
jobs as parents is to give our children not everything they quote unquote deserve or make their lives as easy as possible, but to be so faithful in our delivery of God's word and in being a true reflection of His goodness as much as possible. And then when we don't do well, apologizing for it and repenting and confessing to our kids and accepting their forgiveness and moving forward. But part of our job is to lay this foundation for them, this legacy. And for some people, that's going to be easier than others. That's why I'm always encouraging people who have boring testimonies like I do, boring, quote unquote, where it wasn't like I was in drugs and I was promiscuous and, I had an abortion and, this litany of things that the Lord saved me from. And yet the Lord has still saved me from so much darkness in my heart. And so that concept of it's not necessarily a roller coaster. You're on a high, then you're on a low, then you're on a, it's not that linear. It's more like don't get so comfortable in the seasons of ease that the Lord has for you that instead of being grateful for them, you resent the times that it will inevitably come where you struggle because everybody has it, no matter how easy it looks for them. Everybody
Exactly.
has it. And
Yeah.
also, don't get so convinced of the valley that you're in being the only thing that lasts that you start to despair. Very personal example of something that seems kind of small but was really debilitating. I struggled with back pain really
Yeah.
strongly for
Yeah.
about 4 months back in the fall.
Oh,
Our
wow.
house flooded last August, right before I released a book called Hard is Not the Same Thing as Bad, like right before, a
Isn't
week
that
before.
wild? I remember going, "Are you kidding me?" Like,
And
really?
yeah, yeah, the Lord was like, "Do you really mean it?" It flooded our entire downstairs. We've
Oh,
had to
that was
rip
crazy.
everything out, completely start over with our kitchen. This is the house that we built. So you like ripping up stuff that you put in the first place with your own hands. And the Lord's been really gracious in the process, but it has still been a
Hard.
process. Yeah, it's been hard. I think I'm allowed to say that. And I started having really serious back pain that was affecting like my ability to put pants on in the morning
Yep.
and to pick up my children and to bend over to wipe
Terrible.
a bottom. And I have 3 girls that are not potty trained yet. So that happens all the time. My ability to sit for long periods or do. And I just kept pushing myself so hard through the whole thing because it was like probably the busiest fall of my entire life. I launched a book. I had speaking events. We had to move. We had to renovate a house. We're still doing that. We're not home yet. It was genuinely a lot. And, of
Yeah.
course, they tell you so many of your physical symptoms are often a reflection of your stress levels. And at a certain point, I really did think, not necessarily in despair, but almost more like trying to prepare myself reasonably or realistically for the future. Is this what my physical life looks like for the rest of my life, Lord?
Exactly.
Now,
Sure.
four
Easy to
months
go
is
there.
not. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Easy to go there
Yeah.
mentally in that
Yeah.
moment.
It just, I had tried so many things and they were not having a material effect. It did not seem. And so it was kind of like, you're going to have to learn how to cope. And I know people with chronic illnesses that do. They do. They are getting up every day with chronic pain. They are doing their life with chronic pain. And it diminishes you. It makes you more short tempered. It tires you out, like just all this stuff. And so, not too surprisingly, I finally got to the point because I was still teaching classes. I was just majorly modifying. And I got to a point where I realized I could not teach this weightlifting class anymore. In the middle of classes when I realized it. So I was having to like fake the moves and tell people I'm so sorry. And it was just the Lord being like, just stop. Like you aren't as essential as you're pretending like you are. Because we don't have a lot of subs, and I was trying not to inconvenience people. It was less like I'm the only one that can do this well, and more like there isn't much of anybody else. And I'm going to stress somebody else out if I have them do this for me. So I'm just going to keep doing it until I literally couldn't, physically could not. And so, who else isn't surprised that rest was actually the main thing that healed my back?
Yes.
And in this season that I'm in right now, even with not being home yet, even with some other things that are going on, it's not nearly as stressful as last fall. And the Lord
Wow.
has restored me and
Wow.
redeemed me. And then there will be another season where you're in it and you just can't feel like you're ever going to get out of it, and that it might not ever be good again. But the big thing is to declare the Lord's goodness through it. Because I will say, I didn't feel despair. I was like, Lord, you're good. I don't know what you're doing here. I don't know why we're doing it this way, but you're good. We're
Yeah.
just gonna keep going.
Right. And he also just used you to model to a lot of other moms out there when they're facing something like that, how to walk through it with grace, even when it's really hard.
Well,
So,
that's really kind. I would love to make sure that you know that I didn't always do it well.
well, I was watching. I was inspired, and I have had seasons of back pain, so I also felt your pain and was like, oh man. And you can't help but think, this is it. This
Yeah,
could be my
this
new
this could
normal.
be me. Yep,
Okay,
yep.
well, I again could talk to you for far too long. I just want to ask one question as far as those listening who have kids, because I talk a lot about character and I have a character training course. And in my books, I have a chapter in my book, Raising Amazing, that is adversity is the fuel for greatness. And that's really about helping our kids not run from challenges. Obviously don't go looking for them. None of us do. But when they are facing something hard, whether it's relational or physical, there's some really hard things out there. How to teach our kids to use those things, to turn to God, to find, the strength to face them and grow through them. And then also, because the reality is we are raising our kids in a world where some kids have a pretty easy life, right? We have to admit, even, I mean, most of our kids compared to 100 years ago, where just everybody had to do a lot of physical hard things just to
Yeah,
survive as a family.
yeah,
Most of our kids have a fairly easy life. So I encourage parents to make sure that they find ways to give their kids challenges, to create things
absolutely.
that will grow those character muscles. So clearly this book is, across the board, can relate to anybody. I know a lot of it is related to motherhood and hard things, but do you have a word for parents raising kids, giving them some of that same message?
Absolutely. So I think we need to be really cognizant of the fact that, just like you just said, we are not doing our kids a favor when we make sure that they never encounter hard things. And you mentioned, like, we don't go looking for challenges, and I know exactly what you mean. But I would say absolutely go looking for challenges, but
Yes.
don't necessarily go looking for like some form of masochism. Like,
Right.
and I talk about
Exactly.
that in the book because people are like, wait a minute, not all hard things are good. Agree. Just because hard is not the same thing as bad doesn't mean that every challenging, difficult bit of suffering we encounter is actually a good thing.
Yes.
You know,
Yeah.
sometimes we're bringing it on ourselves. Sometimes it's the
Yes.
fallen world we live in. Sometimes it's evil people. Sometimes it's disease, and we're not going to declare that good because the Lord clearly did not create that at the beginning of the world and declare it good. You know, this is a fallen world. And so I think we are absolutely on the same page when we are saying, give your kids opportunities to be uncomfortable. Let them be bored. You don't have to be their cruise ship director. I mean, that is just a very basic thing. You don't have to fill your children's lives with entertainment. It's not easy to be bored. You feel uncomfortable and annoyed, but it's certainly not bad to have to become more resourceful, to have to wash your own clothes and learn that process. So I just really feel like there's a lot of opportunities within the home. I mean, in homeschooling, certainly, but any other family's dynamic as well, to give your kids responsibilities that help them to learn new abilities, new skills. So I have one that's learning to bake, and she's been in the process for a long time. And there have been a lot of messes and a lot of failed recipes. But we are to the point where sometimes I come in from doing a podcast with someone, just like I'm doing with you, and there are 3 loaves of baked bread on my counter, and they are delicious. And
Yay.
she's only 11 years old. And I know that that's not an example of something that is truly like strenuous.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
learning new things is, like I said, it's uncomfortable.
Right.
So I think we need to be careful not to rob our kids of that opportunity. Two, maybe this should have been one. We need to be careful how we're responding to hard things in front of them. We are whining and
Modeling.
complaining constantly, and then we're saying, hey, have a good attitude. Go do that hard thing. Our kids are going to see the hypocrisy and they're not going to respond well to that. So, leading by example is huge. And the third thing I would say is, in the process of pouring into our kids biblically, which we are called to do in Deuteronomy 6 through 8, that we're to teach our kids God's way, that we are to impress them upon our children as we walk, as we sit, as we lie, as we stand, which is basically everything that we do,
All
right?
day
That
long.
covers all of it. That since we are called to be our children's primary spiritual educators, one of the great things that we have in the Bible is stories of adversity constantly, whether it's David or Elijah or Elisha or Paul or Jesus or James, and we're talking about people who ended up beheaded, crucified upside down, hiding in a rock because they were going to be burned at on an altar to Baal, like hiding from this crazy king that's trying to kill them. Like, You have so many opportunities to, I think it's Elisa Childers, and I may misquote her horribly, but she was basically talking about how growing up with the Bible, she always respected God's word, but she never thought of it as like applicable to real life. It was something, she said something similar to that. She said it was not until she started looking at these quote unquote stories as histories of people with very real needs, wants, hungers, pains, like emotions, feelings, just like we have, that she realized this is not just an allegory. This is an example to follow. This is an example of the Lord actually showing up in a specific real person's life and
Yeah.
bringing victory and bringing change. So, being faithful to teach those examples to our children, I think they're there to help us out.
Huge. Absolutely. And I know you, like we, love missionary stories
Yes.
and reading stories to our
Yes.
kids, even, beyond the Bible. Bible has plenty to last a long time, but there's also some great inspirational stories that
Yes.
can set that example. I always say, I want my kid, I have this like little security that if my kids were to face the unthinkable, put in whatever your unthinkable is, I want them to be able to recall people of the past who have faced even harder and
So
made it
good.
through.
So
Made
good.
it through.
Yeah, Christian Heroes Then and Now. I always is
Yeah.
a series that I always recommend. It's super engagingly written. The stories are just mind-blowingly compelling. I mean, I know that they probably left out some of the parts where these people were real humans, but
Exactly.
you come away so inspired and so
Yes.
just in awe of the way the Lord works in regular people's lives.
Abby, I could talk to you all day long, but I need to let you go. So thank you for your time. There's so much more in the book. Your husband, like Raising Amazing, my husband has a word to the dads at the end. People have loved that. I love
Love
that
it.
your husband contributes at the end of each
Yes.
chapter. So we need those men to be reading, even if it's a little bit. We need
Yeah,
men to have good role
absolutely.
models. So I'm grateful for both of you. Obviously, you can find this book anywhere books are sold. Where can people just jump on and follow you, get in your weekly Q&As, all that?
Oh yeah. So I'm microblogging on Instagram and Facebook. Instagram is at m.is.for.mama. People couldn't read the name
You'll
without
find
the
it
dots.
easily, though.
Yeah, it's easy to find. Should pop up. You can find me and over 600 blog posts archived on msformama.net. You can get on my weekly news plan or newsletter, which is a meal plan newsletter. I literally give you 5 dinners and 5 breakfasts every single
I
week.
get that.
And I don't care if you use any or all of them, but I get messages from people that are like, this is such like a practical help. I don't even
It
have to
is.
think about it anymore. It's amazing. So
Love
I'm
it.
happy to give that resource. And like you mentioned, I do a weekly Q&A on Wednesdays called What Do You Want to Know Wednesday, where I can't answer all the questions, but because I get hundreds every week, but I do that on my I do that on my social media as well. And I have a podcast called M is for Mama, just to keep it
There we
easy.
go. Yeah. So you're bored all the time,
Word all
obviously.
the time.
Hey, I wasn't planning to ask this, but with those weekly meal plans, is there a cookbook in your future?
No, there is not. There really isn't. I love to cook.
Never say never.
Okay, it's true. It's true. I love to cook,
People would love it.
and I'm decent at it, meaning I make food that tastes good, and I kind of have a feel for it after many years of doing it. But I don't have a passion for breaking down the process. I get really, even when people are like, "Do a reel of this," and I'm like, "Oh, it's too much time. Like I can't."
Yeah, I get you. My mom taught me to just, kind of dump, feel it out, throw it
Yeah,
in this and that. And so when I post recipes, I'm always like, oh no, I've got to actually give the
I
amounts
know.
right.
People are like, "What are you doing?" I'm like, "I made it up, okay?"
Right? So true. Well, Abby, thank you so much for your time. Love talking to you and just so encouraged by you and grateful for the work that you do.
Thank you. Right back at you, Monica. Thank you.
God bless and aloha.